Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching.
The threshold corridor had no stars. Not one. That was the first thing every navigator wrote in the logs, and the last thing any of them stopped noticing. Two unstable nebulae pressed in from either side, close enough to choke sensors with static, far enough apart to leave a navigable lane roughly 400,000 kilometers wide. No stars, no relay beacons, no celestial reference points. Just the ship ahead of you, the ship behind you, and engines pushing through irradiated dark. On his second day in the corridor, Captain Maddox Serro stood at the tactical display in the Pale Horse's Combat Information Center, watching 12 cargo haulers drift ahead like fat animals being led to water. Sovereignty Trade Column Auric 9. 12 vessels carrying enough consolidated wealth to fund a frontier war, packed tight in a standard box formation, running at 70% thrust because the heaviest hauler couldn't manage more without shaking apart. Around them, the escort. 6 Valith warships held position in a wide ring, 2 forward, 2 flanking, 2 trailing. Clean formation, textbook spacing. The kind of geometry that looked perfect in academy briefings and collapsed the moment someone started shooting. And then there were the 4 ships that didn't belong. The Pale Horse sat high and portside, riding above the convoy's center line. The Ashmark ran 2,000 clicks starboard, her electronic warfare arrays dark but ready. The Dustman lumbered at the convoy's rear, heavy with munitions nobody had asked her to use. The Wake held point, 5,000 clicks ahead, running passive scans that returned almost nothing through the nebular interference. 87 humans spread across 4 ships, fulfilling the last contract anyone would give them. Rennick stood at the sensor station 3 meters to Maddox's left. He hadn't spoken in 20 minutes. That was unusual. Rennick talked when he was comfortable. When he went quiet, it meant he was counting things that didn't add up. "Say it," Maddox said. He didn't look away from the display. Rennick pulled up a formation overlay and put it on the main screen. 2 images, side by side. The left showed the convoy's escort positions from 14 hours ago. The right showed current positions. The difference was subtle. The Valith warships had compressed inward, closer to the haulers by roughly 800 clicks per ship. At the same time, the gap between the Valith escorts and the human ships had widened by almost the same margin. Not enough to trigger any proximity alert, not enough to violate any formation protocol, just enough to create space. "They've been drifting for 6 hours, Rennick said. "Gradual, no thrust corrections on record. They're using the nebular current to mask the repositioning. Smart. It puts us outside their point defense umbrella. If something hits us, their systems won't overlap with ours." "I know what it means." Rennick closed the overlay. "When?" Maddox checked the navigation track. 41 hours to the corridor exit. At current speed, they'd hit the narrowest section of the passage, a choke point where the nebulae pressed in to barely 200,000 clicks in roughly 18 hours. "The choke," Maddox said. "Maximum nebular interference. Minimum sensor range. If I were running it, that's where I'd do it." "That's where anyone would do it." "Then we agree." Maddox reached across the display and pulled up the reactor status panel for all 4 ships. 4 green indicators, stable output, nominal temperatures, containment fields holding clean. He studied it for a moment, then left the panel open on the secondary screen where the CIC watch crew could see it. No one asked why. The Valith LIAISON arrived at 1340 ship time. A Sovereignty courier shuttle docked long enough to drop coal at the Pale Horse's auxiliary airlock, then burned back toward the escort formation without waiting for him. Coal entered the CIC the way every Valith entered a human space, with the careful, measured steps of someone trying not to touch anything. He was median cast, which meant his skull plates were narrower than an ascendant's, and he wore no rank markings. Trade administrator, bureaucrat, the kind of person empires sent when they wanted oversight without authority. His plates were flat against his skull, neutral, controlled. But his four-fingered hands kept adjusting the data tablet he carried, rotating it between grips the way a human might click a pen. Nervous habit. Cole probably didn't know he was doing it. Maddox did. Captain Cero. Cole's voice carried the clipped precision of someone speaking a language he'd learned from recordings. Fleet Commander Thesic Vor has transmitted updated navigation parameters for the corridor transit. Minor adjustments to account for a density fluctuation in the portside nebula. He extended the tablet. Maddox took it, scrolled through the data. Course corrections, thrust profiles, formation spacing, standard navigational update. The kind of routine adjustment that happened 3 or 4 times during any corridor transit. Except for one detail. The updated formation placed the Pale Horse and the Ashmark further to starboard, away from the convoy core, closer to the nebula wall. The Dustman was repositioned to trail the convoy by an additional 600 clicks. The Wake's forward position remained unchanged, which meant she'd be isolated ahead of the group by an even wider margin than before. On paper, it was a response to a nebular density shift. In practice, it pushed every human ship to the edges, opened clean firing lanes between the Valith escorts and the Merc vessels, and ensured that when the first salvo came, the humans would be caught in a crossfire with nowhere to maneuver except into the nebula itself. A kill box dressed up as a spreadsheet. Acknowledged, Maddox said. He handed the tablet back. Cole's skull plates shifted, a micro movement, the rear plates lifting a fraction while the forward plates compressed. It happened fast. Most humans would have missed it entirely. Maddox had spent 6 years working Valith contracts. He didn't miss it. That plate configuration meant distress, not fear. Valith didn't express fear the way humans understood it. It was closer to institutional shame. The recognition that something was happening within the structure that violated the structure's own rules, and the inability to do anything about it. Cole knew. He might not know the details. He might not have seen the operational orders. But he was median caste, which meant he understood the machinery of Valith power well enough to recognize when it was being used for something it shouldn't be, and he was standing in the CIC of a ship that was about to be murdered by his own people, delivering the navigation data that would help make it happen. His hands rotated the tablet again. 3 full turns. "Is there anything else, Captain?" "No," Maddox said. "Thank you, Cole." The Valith left. His steps were faster on the way out. Rennick waited until the hatch sealed. "The route update. I saw it. They're pushing us to the wall." "Yes. So it's real." Maddox turned back to the tactical display. The convoy crawled forward. The Valith warships drifted in their tightening ring. 87 humans rode 4 ships through a corridor with no stars and no way out. "Warm the burst array on the Ashmark," Maddox said, quietly. "No active emissions. Just get it ready." Rennick didn't ask what the burst array was for. He'd helped program the transmission package before they'd left port. Every sensor log, every communication record, every contract document and formation update. Compressed, encrypted, and loaded into a one-shot wideband transmission designed to punch through nebular interference and hit any relay beacon within 8 light-years. He picked up the internal comm. "Ashmark. Pale Horse Actual. Run Diagnostic Cycle 7 on the forward sensor package. Authorization Rennick 44. Diagnostic Cycle 7 didn't exist, but the Ashmark's EW officer would know what it meant. "Understood, Pale Horse. Starting Cycle 7. Estimate 40 minutes to completion." Rennick set down the comm. Maddox was already looking at something else. The reactor panel. Still green. Still on screen. The tight beam to the Dustman connected at 1422. "No encryption." Maddox had been clear about that from the start. The Valith monitored encrypted channels as a matter of doctrine. Any coded transmission between the human ships would confirm suspicion and accelerate the timeline. So instead, Maddox used something older, something that didn't exist in any Valith signals manual. Merc verbal code. Plain language phrases embedded in routine conversation, layered with meaning that only someone who'd worked human contracts for decades would catch. It wasn't sophisticated. It wasn't unbreakable. But it was invisible to anyone who didn't know what to listen for, and the Valith had never bothered to learn. "Dustman! Pale Horse! How's the cargo bay?" Harkin's voice came back flat and unhurried. The man had sounded exactly the same during a cargo transfer as he had during a hull breach on the Karathi job 3 years ago. "Bay's tight. Running inventory. Some of the thermal couplings on the port munitions rack need replacing, but they'll hold for the transit. Don't bother with replacements. We won't be restocking after this run." Silence. 2 seconds. That was the confirmation. Won't be restocking meant no return trip. Harkin had been doing this long enough to parse it without hesitation. "Understood. You want me to distribute stores to the other ships? Spread the load?" "Negative. Keep everything consolidated on the Dustman. All of it." Another pause. Shorter this time. Keep everything consolidated meant the Dustman herself was the munition. Every warhead, every missile, every fuel reserve, packed into one ship that would go up like a small star when her reactor breached. "Copy that, Pale Horse. Consolidated it is. Anything else?"
Yep.
"Just make sure your people know the shift schedule for tomorrow." Shift schedule for tomorrow. There was no tomorrow. Harkin would read it clean. "Already posted. Harkin out." Maddox switched channels. The Wake's captain, a wiry 40-year-old named Essen Bry, answered on the first ping. "Wake, Pale Horse. Status." "Quiet out here, Pale Horse. Running passive. Getting a lot of nothing on the scopes." "Keep it passive. Don't chase contacts." "And Bry, pull your maintenance crew off the forward hull plating. No point patching what we're not bringing home." The line held for 3 seconds. "Understood, Pale Horse. Maintenance crew reassigned. Wake out." Maddox closed the channel. He stood alone in the forward section of the CIC. Behind him, 2 watch officers monitored their stations and said nothing. They hadn't heard the code. They didn't need to. They'd know soon enough. Everyone on every ship would know, because Maddox would tell them when the time came. Not with speeches. Not with grand last words. With the same flat, professional tone he used for every order he'd ever given. He looked at the tactical display one more time. 12 haulers. Fat and slow and full of wealth that belonged to an empire that had decided 87 humans were cheaper to kill than to pay. 6 warships. Crewed by officers who'd been told this was pest removal, a sanitation operation. Clean up the humans, file the report, go home to careers built on a lie. 4 Merc ships, old, patched, running on contracts that didn't exist anymore in a galaxy that had already written them off. And 1 broadcast, sitting in the Ashmark's transmission buffer like a loaded round in a chamber. Waiting. Maddox checked the reactor panel one last time. Green across the board. 4 ships. 4 reactors. 4 cores that could be pushed past critical in under 90 seconds if you disabled the safety interlocks, which he'd had done before they left port. He didn't smile. He didn't clench his jaw. He didn't do anything that anyone watching would remember as a moment of decision, because the decision had been made weeks ago in a dockyard office when he'd read the contract terms and seen the formation assignments and understood exactly what the Valith sovereignty was buying. Not an escort, an execution. They'd paid the graveyard shift to show up and die quietly. Maddox had taken the money, signed the contract, flown his people into the corridor, and now he stood in his CIC, watching the kill box take shape around him, with 4 reactors on green and a broadcast ready to fire, and absolutely no intention of dying quietly. The corridor had no stars, no reference points, No witnesses, and that was fine. The relay beacons would do the witnessing. Every faction, every merc network, every trade guild and independent operator within 8 light years would hear what happened here. Not a distress call, not a plea, a record. Time-stamped, verified, impossible to deny. Maddox left the reactor panel on screen and walked to the command chair. 18 hours to the choke point. He sat down and waited for the war to start. 18 hours crept by like a slow bleed. The threshold corridor narrowed exactly as the navigation charts predicted, the twin nebulae pressing inward, squeezing the passable lane down to a channel barely 200,000 kilometers across. Radiation levels climbed. Sensor range collapsed to a few thousand clicks in every direction, turning the tactical display into a murky wash of static and ghost contacts. The convoy haulers tightened their formation out of necessity, lumbering closer together like herd animals sensing a predator they couldn't see. Maddox stood where he'd stood 18 hours ago. Same position, same display. He hadn't slept. Rennick had tried to rotate him off the CIC at 4 o'clock and received a look that ended the conversation. The Valith escorts had completed their drift. The numbers on Rennick's overlay were final now. 6 warships locked in a tight inner ring around the convoy, point defense systems interlocked, weapons arcs covering every approach vector from the outside. The human ships sat beyond that ring like debris caught in a current, separated, exposed, each one isolated in its own pocket of empty space, with clear firing lanes between it and the nearest Valith guns. The formation wasn't an escort anymore. It was a firing solution with engines. "Burst array status?" Maddox said. Rennick checked his board. "Hot. Ashmark confirms ready. 1 transmission. Wideband. Every relay in range. Say the word and it goes." Not yet. At 9:06, Fleet Commander Thesic Vor transmitted a final formation update. The message arrived on standard channels, formatted with the precise bureaucratic structure the Valith used for everything from fleet maneuvers to dinner reservations, updated spacing parameters, revised thrust profiles, minor adjustments. The update pushed the wake an additional 2,000 clicks forward, alone, beyond visual range of the convoy in current conditions. Bry would be the first to die. Vor wanted him far enough out that the other human ships couldn't react in time to support him. Maddox acknowledged the update, complied, sent the revised coordinates to all 4 ships. On the Dustman, Harkin armed every warhead in the cargo bay. He did it by hand, moving through the racks with the methodical patience of a man who'd handled munitions for 30 years. Each warhead clicked from safe to armed with a sound like a knuckle cracking. His crew watched him work and said nothing. They knew. The arithmetic was simple enough. The Dustman was carrying enough ordnance to gut a small moon. When her reactor went critical, the warheads would go with it. The combined yield would turn everything within 5,000 clicks into expanding gas. Harkin finished the last rack, straightened up, looked at his crew. "Anyone wants the pods? Go now. No questions asked." Nobody moved. "Good," Harkin said. He walked back to the bridge. On the wake, Bry watched his displays show nothing. The nebula had swallowed everything beyond 3,000 clicks. He was flying point for a convoy he could no longer see, taking orders from an empire that was about to kill him, in a ship fast enough to run if running were an option. It wasn't. The corridor walls were lethal. Nebular radiation would cook an unshielded crew in minutes. Behind him, 6 warships waited to open fire. Ahead of him, 40 hours of empty corridor stretched to an exit he'd never reach. Bry pulled up his reactor controls, checked the safety interlocks, confirmed they were already disabled. Maddox's people had done the work in port, quiet and clean, and Bry had signed off on it without a word. He set the override sequence to a single command. 1 keystroke, reactor to critical in 60 seconds. Then he waited. At 0931, Every Valith warship in the formation pivoted simultaneously. It was beautiful, in a mechanical way. 6 vessels rotating in perfect synchronization, each one swinging broadside to its nearest human target. Gun ports opened along their flanks, like wounds splitting open. Targeting systems went active. Rennick's board screamed with lock-on warnings, 6 distinct sources painting every human ship in the formation. The coordination was flawless, Academy perfect, the kind of maneuver that took hours of rehearsal and absolute confidence that the target wouldn't shoot back in time. The Wake took the first salvo. 2 Valith warships fired simultaneously, concentrated kinetic batteries hammering Bry's portside hull in a pattern designed to disable engines first, then weapons, then life support. Systematic, efficient. The Wake shuddered, lurched, and began venting atmosphere from 3 hull breaches. Bry didn't flinch. He'd known for 18 hours. Across the convoy, Thesek Vor's voice cut through every open channel. Measured, formal. The cadence of an officer reading prepared remarks. Attention all vessels. The human mercenary company designated Black Line Tactical Solutions has committed hostile action against Sovereignty Trade Column Auric 9. All human vessels are ordered to power down weapons, disable engines, and prepare for boarding. Failure to comply will be met with terminal force. This action is authorized under Mandate 77, Absolute, Section 12, Threat Neutralization. The broadcast was perfect. Every word crafted to sound like a response to aggression rather than the opening of an ambush. The convoy haulers would log it. The Valith warship recorders would log it. When the after-action reports were filed, the record would show that the humans attacked first, and the Sovereignty responded with appropriate force. Except there would be another record, and it would tell a very different story. Maddox didn't respond to Vor. He didn't open a channel. He didn't waste breath on denial or accusation, or any of the words that a desperate man might reach for when he realized he'd been set up to die. He reached for the ship-wide comm instead. 1 button, 4 ships. Every speaker, every headset, every crew station across the Pale Horse, the Ashmark, the Dustman, and the Shattered Wake. Graveyard protocol. All hands. 3 words. Flat. No emphasis. The same tone he'd used to order a course correction. Across 4 ships, 87 humans heard the order and understood it completely. Not because it was dramatic, because they drilled it. 12 times in simulation, twice in live exercises. Graveyard protocol was a checklist, not a speech. Reactors to critical. Navigation locked on designated targets. Safety interlocks confirmed disabled. All hands to stations. No evacuation. The safeties came off every reactor in the graveyard shift. 4 cores began their climb. Cole had been standing in the aft section of the Pale Horse's CIC when the Valith warships opened fire. He saw it on the tactical display first, the sudden bloom of weapon signatures, the coordinated pivot, the lock-on warnings flooding Rennick's station. For 2 seconds, his training held. Valith Mediancast were taught to process information before reacting, to find the procedural framework for any situation before allowing emotion to interfere. Then he heard Thesek Vor's broadcast. Hostile action by the humans. Contract violations. Authorized under Mandate 77. Cole's skull plates locked rigid. Each plate from crown to jaw clamped flat against the bone. A configuration so extreme that any Valith who saw it would have looked away out of courtesy. It was the equivalent of a human's face draining of all color. Not fear, revulsion. The full-body recognition of something so fundamentally wrong that the autonomic system overrode conscious control. He knew Vor was lying, not suspected. Knew! He'd been standing in this CIC for 2 days. He'd watched the humans run passive sensors, comply with every formation update, follow every instruction without complaint. He'd delivered the navigation data that repositioned their ships into a kill box, and watched Maddox accept it with a nod. No hostile action, no contract violations, just an empire murdering its own contractors and calling it self-defense. Cole turned to Maddox. He expected rage, panic, the wild energy of a cornered animal. Maddox was calm, not performing calm, not forcing himself through the motions. Genuinely, terribly calm. He stood at the tactical display, watching the formation dissolve into weapons fire, and gave orders in the same flat voice he'd used for 2 days. Course adjustments, reactor status confirmations, communication checks with the other ships. He was working. "Captain." Cole's voice cracked on the second syllable. His plates were still locked. "What is graveyard protocol?" Maddox looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since the mission started. Not with anger, not with contempt, with the steady, patient attention of someone about to explain something very simple to someone who needed to hear it clearly. "Reactors to critical overload on all 4 ships. Navigation locked on collision course. 2 ships on the convoy, 2 on the escorts. Terminal velocity. No course correction. No abort." Cole processed the words. His plates didn't move because they were already as rigid as they could get. "You will destroy the convoy. And the escort. And us. There are no survivors in this protocol. No." Cole looked at the tactical display. The wake was burning, still absorbing fire from 2 warships, still holding course. The ash mark was spooling up. The Dustman, loaded with every armed warhead the outfit owned, was already accelerating. "You knew," Cole said, "before the corridor. You knew this would happen." "I suspected." "And you came anyway." "We took the contract." Cole stood very still. His hands were at his sides. The data tablet he'd carried for 2 days was on the deck, where he'd dropped it when the first shots landed. His plates began to shift, a slow, grinding release from the locked position, 1 plate at a time, resetting into a configuration Maddox had never seen on a living Valeth. Acceptance, not of death, of responsibility. "There are escape pods on deck 4, Maddox said. "You have 30 seconds to reach one. I won't stop you." Cole didn't move. "My empire did this," he said. "I carried the navigation data. I walked it into your command center and handed it to you. You didn't know. I suspected, as you did." The plates settled, locked into the new configuration. "I will stay." Maddox held his gaze for 1 second. Then he turned back to the display. "Rennick, fire the burst." The Ashmark's electronic warfare suite had been built for jamming, spoofing, and sensor disruption. It was not designed for what Rennick's team had turned it into, a single-shot broadcasting cannon, every emitter and antenna array rewired to fire 1 compressed data package on a frequency wide enough to punch through nebular interference like a fist through wet paper. The burst fired at 9:34. All communication log from the past 48 hours. Each formation update. Every sensor recording showing the Valeth escorts repositioning for ambush. Thesic Vor's own tactical transmissions, time-stamped and tagged with sovereignty encryption signatures that couldn't be forged. The contract, the mandate, the killbox mathematics, and the audio. Vor's broadcast declaring human hostility, followed immediately by the sensor data proving his own ships fired first. The package hit the relay beacons at light speed. From there, it would propagate outward through the network, copied, cached, distributed to every node within range, every Merc network, all trade guild, any independent faction and sovereign power with a receiver pointed in the right direction. It could not be recalled. It could not be scrubbed. It could not be denied. The Ashmark's arrays burned out from the overload. Every emitter on the ship fused into slag. It didn't matter. The broadcast was away. The truth was already traveling faster than anything in the corridor could chase. Thesic Vor's tactical officer detected the burst 3 seconds after it fired. The report reached Vor 4 seconds after that. Vor's skull plates didn't shift. Ascendant caste trained that reflex out of their officers before they were old enough to command. But his hands gripped the edge of his command display with enough force to crack the casing. He understood immediately what the burst was, what it contained, what it meant. "All batteries," Vor said. "Maximum rate of fire. Kill them all. Now!" The corridor lit up. 6 Valith warships opened fire with everything they had. Kinetic batteries, energy lances, point defense systems repurposed for offensive saturation. The space between the escorts and the human ships filled with ordnance so dense it looked solid on the tactical displays. The wake came apart first. Bry's ship had been absorbing fire for 3 minutes, bleeding atmosphere and crew from a dozen hull breaches. A concentrated salvo from 2 warships struck the wake's engineering section and blew the stern off in a spray of metal and frozen gas. The forward section kept moving, momentum carrying the wreckage on its original course, tumbling, burning, dead. But Bry had locked his reactor override before the first shot. The core was already past critical. The containment field held for 11 more seconds, carrying the wreckage deeper into the formation. Then the wake detonated. The blast swallowed the 2 nearest Valith warships in a sphere of white, not destroyed, but blinded. Sensors burned, hull plating scorched, point defense arrays fused. They tumbled out of formation, firing blind into nothing. The ash mark used the gap. Burned hard through the opening Bry's death had carved, arrays dead, weapons spent. Nothing left but a reactor climbing past every safety threshold her engineers had ever calculated. She drove straight for the center of the convoy. The dustman followed, slow, heavy, carrying enough armed ordnance to make her detonation 3 times worse than any single reactor breach. Harkin sat on his bridge and watched the distance close on his display. The numbers counted down like a clock. And the Pale Horse, Maddox's ship, turned directly into Thessic Vor's flagship, not toward the convoy, not toward escape, toward the command ship that had ordered the ambush, broadcast the lie, and set 87 humans up to die for an empire's convenience. Maddox sat in the command chair. The reactor readout on his display had passed yellow and entered red. Containment alarms screamed. The hull shuddered as Valith batteries found their range, punching through armor plating that was never designed to survive this kind of concentrated fire. Cole stood beside the tactical display. His plates were still. His hands were at his sides. He watched the distance counter between the Pale Horse and Vor's flagship decrease in steady, irreversible increments. The corridor had no stars, no witnesses, no record, except the one they'd already sent. 4 reactors in the red, 4 ships on terminal approach, a convoy with nowhere to run, and an escort that had just realized, far too late, that the humans they'd come to kill had never planned to survive. They'd planned to be remembered. The distance closed. The dustman reached the convoy first. Harkin's ship was never fast. She was built for hauling munitions through contested space, not for attack runs. But speed didn't matter when you'd locked the navigation 3 minutes ago, and the target was a cluster of 12 cargo haulers packed so tight inside a corridor that they couldn't maneuver without hitting each other. The Valith escorts had focused their fire on the Pale Horse and the ash mark, the visible threats, the ships that were still maneuvering, still broadcasting, still dangerous in ways the Valith tactical doctrine could categorize. The dustman was slow. It was behind the formation, and it was just a transport. But the dustman was the ship carrying every armed warhead the graveyard shift owned. Harkin sat on his bridge and watched the haulers fill his forward display. 600 clicks, 400, 200. The convoy's point defense systems fired, light batteries designed to intercept debris and missiles, not a 3,000-ton ship running at full burn with a reactor past critical. The rounds punched through the dustman's hull like needles through cloth. Atmosphere vented. Bulkheads failed. The port engine mount sheared off, and the ship began to rotate. A slow, ugly tumble that did nothing to change the trajectory because the engines were already gone and momentum was doing the rest. Harkin didn't try to correct it. There was nothing to correct. The math was done. He keyed the intercom one last time, not to the other ships, to his own crew, who had stayed at their stations when he'd given them the option to leave. "Good working with you." The dustmen hit the convoy center at 400 meters per second. The reactor breached on impact. Containment fields collapsed in a cascade that took 11 milliseconds from start to finish. The core went critical, and in the same microsecond, the heat front reached the munitions bay. 600 armed warheads packed into reinforced racks that had been designed to survive hull breaches and combat damage, and every contingency except deliberate detonation from within. The blast expanded outward in a sphere of white. 6 cargo haulers ceased to exist. They didn't break apart. They didn't burn. They transitioned from solid matter to expanding gas in a time frame too short for their emergency systems to register. 3 more haulers, caught at the edge of the blast radius, split open along their spines and tumbled into each other, cargo spilling into the void, fabrication cores and sealed containers and processed minerals scattering like grain from a torn sack. The shockwave hit the nearest Valith warship broadside and crushed its port hull like a boot on a tin can. The ship folded inward, reactors scrammed, and went dark. The ash mark came in 7 seconds later. Her arrays were slag. Her weapons were spent. Ashmark's crew had been at their station since the burst transmission fired, sitting in a ship that had nothing left to give except mass and velocity, and a reactor that was already screaming past every threshold. She hit the remaining haulers from the starboard side, driving into the wreckage field that the dustman's detonation had created. The impact alone would have been enough to kill the ship. The reactor breach turned it into a second sun. The 3 crippled haulers that had survived the dustman's blast came apart in the Ashmark's detonation wave. Cargo, hull plating, crew compartments, escape pods that had never launched, all of it converted to shrapnel moving at a significant fraction of terminal velocity, shredding everything within range. 12 haulers. Gone. Sovereignty trade column Auric 9, the quarterly economic payload of a 42-system empire, reduced to irradiated debris in under 15 seconds. The Pale Horse hit Thesic Vor's flagship head-on. Maddox had aimed for the command section. The Valith ship was 3 times the Pale Horse's mass, better armored, better armed, and crewed by 600 officers who had trained their entire careers for fleet combat against peer adversaries. None of that training covered what to do when a modified human frigate with a reinforced ramming prow and an overloading reactor drove straight into your bridge at full military thrust inside a corridor too narrow to evade. Vor saw it coming. His tactical displays showed the Pale Horse's approach vector, a straight line, no deviation, no evasion attempts, just raw acceleration on a collision course. His helmsman tried to rotate the ship, bring the heavier ventral armor to bear. The corridor walls were too close, the turn radius too wide, the time too short. Vor's skull plates were rigid. Ascendant discipline held. His hands were steady on the command display, entering orders that would never be executed. On the Pale Horse, the forward display showed nothing but the gray hull of Vor's flagship, growing, filling the screen, becoming everything. Cole stood at the tactical station. His plates had not moved since he'd made his choice. The configuration of acceptance, a pattern that Valith scholars had written about, but that most living Valith had never seen on another's face. It was reserved for moments of civilizational failure, moments when the structure itself was the thing that had broken. Maddox sat in the command chair. His hands were on the armrests. The reactor alarm was a continuous tone, a sound designed to be so unpleasant that no crew could ignore it, a sound that meant you had seconds to evacuate before the core breached. Nobody was evacuating. The distance counter on the navigation display ticked down. 400 meters. 200. 50. 0. The Pale Horse struck Vor's flagship just below the command deck. The ramming prow, originally designed for debris field navigation, reinforced in a dockyard by engineers who knew exactly what it would be used for, punched through the outer hull, the armor layer, and the internal bulkheads before the frigate's own structural frame collapsed from the deceleration forces. Then the reactor went. The detonation gutted Vor's flagship from the inside. The human ship's core breached within the body of the Valith vessel, turning the warship into a container for an explosion it was never meant to hold. The flagship bulged, split, and blew apart in 3 uneven pieces that tumbled outward, trailing fire and atmosphere and debris. The Wake's wreckage, Bry's ship, dead and tumbling since the opening salvo, carried its own momentum into the formation. The forward section, still moving at the velocity it had held when the stern was blown off, struck a blinded Valith warship that had been crippled by the Wake's earlier detonation. The impact was unguided, unplanned, and devastating. The warship's reactor containment, already stressed by the earlier blast damage, failed on impact. A 5th detonation, 4 human ships, 4 reactor breaches, 600 armed warheads, 12 cargo haulers full of volatile materials, all of it cooking off inside a narrow corridor saturated with nebular particulate that caught the energy release and amplified it, reflected it, fed it back into itself in a cascading reaction that turned the threshold corridor into a column of light, visible from 3 systems. The sensors went blind. The radiation pulse hit the nearest relay station at light speed and burned out every detector on the array. Emergency systems kicked in, rerouted to backup sensors, and found nothing. The entire threshold corridor was whited out, a wall of radiation so intense that no instrument could see past it. Valith Sovereignty Fleet Command registered the pulse 6 minutes after detonation. The duty officer flagged it as a navigational hazard, likely a nebular flare, common enough in unstable regions. He requested telemetry from Thessic Vor's escort squadron. No response. He requested status from Trade Column Auric 9. No response. He pinged the convoy haulers individually, cycling through all 12 transponder codes. Silence. 12 times. The duty officer escalated. Within 20 minutes, the report reached Sovereignty Admiralty, the Ascendant Caste officers who controlled fleet operations across all 42 systems. They dispatched a fast courier to the corridor's exit point. They sent long-range scanner drones toward the entry point. They activated every intelligence asset in the region and demanded answers. The only signal emerging from the threshold corridor was not from any Valith source. It was a compressed data package on a wide-band frequency, propagating outward through the relay network at the speed of light, being copied and cached at every node it touched. It carried no distress header, no emergency codes, no request for assistance. It carried a record. The broadcast reached Sovereignty Station Kelrath, a major military hub, 9 hours after the detonation. Admiral Sorenik Tay sat in a briefing chamber and listened to the playback. The logs were organized chronologically. Formation updates showing the Valith escorts repositioning for ambush. Tactical communications between Vor's warships coordinating firing solutions on the human vessels. Sensor data proving the Valith opened fire first. Contract documents showing the graveyard shift had been hired, deployed, and set up for elimination in a single seamless operation. And Thessic Vor's broadcast, his voice carrying his personal encryption signature, declaring the humans hostile, while his own ships were already 3 minutes into an unprovoked attack. Sorenik Tay's skull plates shifted once, then locked. He turned off the playback and sat in the empty briefing chamber for a long time. The broadcast reached the Dranari Compact, a rival stellar power with no love for the Valith, 14 hours after detonation. Their intelligence directorate played the logs for a full council session. The room listened in silence. When the playback ended, the ranking council member asked a single question. Is this verified? Encryption signatures are authentic sovereignty military. Timestamps align with known convoy departure records. Sensor data matches corridor conditions for the transit window. It is genuine. The council member leaned back. Send it to everyone. The broadcast reached human space 20 hours after the detonation. It arrived at Harmon Station, a free port where 3 human merc companies kept standing offices, through the public relay network, unfiltered and unedited. The station bar had a wall screen that ran continuous news feeds. The broadcast cut into the feed at 22 o'clock local time. The bar was half full. Mercs, dock workers, traders. Most of them looked up when the feed changed. The sensor data played first. Formation overlays showing the Valith escorts closing the kill box. Then the weapons fire. 6 warships pivoting on 4 merc ships that hadn't fired a shot. Then Vor's broadcast laid over the sensor timestamps that proved it was a fabrication. Then the reactor signatures. 4 cores going critical simultaneously. 4 ships accelerating into the convoy. The detonation. The whiteout. Then silence. The bar stayed quiet for a long time. A merc at the counter, a crew chief from a mid-range outfit called Blackwall, set his drink down and stared at the screen. He'd known people in the graveyard shift, not well enough. Nobody spoke. There was nothing to say that the broadcast hadn't already said. The Valith sovereignty issued no official statement. Internal communications, intercepted and leaked within days, showed that every proposed response, denial, counter-narrative, claims of data fabrication, was rejected by sovereignty intelligence as non-viable. The encryption signatures were authentic. The timestamps were verified. The sensor data matched independent recordings from 3 separate relay stations. There was no story that contradicted the one told by 87 dead humans. The contract started arriving 48 hours after the broadcast went public. Not a trickle, a flood. Every human mercenary company with an active license saw its inbox fill with offers from clients across 11 systems. Escort work, garrison contracts, high-risk convoy protection, the same jobs humans had always done. Jobs most planetary governments had been quietly canceling after the Valith pushed for a sector-wide ban on human mercenary contracts. The rates had doubled. Some had tripled, not because the clients were generous, because they were afraid. The graveyard shift had proven something that every merc in the galaxy already knew, but no one had ever demonstrated at this scale. Humans do not break contract. Humans are terrifyingly reliable. If you hire them, they finish the job, even if it kills them. And if you break contract with them, the cost isn't a lawsuit or a sanctions filing or a sternly worded communique to the mercenary guild. The cost is a graveyard. Clients who had previously avoided human companies now sought them out specifically, not out of trust, not out of admiration, out of the cold, calculating logic that it was safer to have humans on your side of the ledger than on the other side. You hired them, you paid them, and you never, ever gave them a reason to decide that their last act of professionalism would be making sure the galaxy knew exactly what you did. On a station called Fenwick's Lantern, 3 relay jumps from the threshold corridor, a mercenary captain named Aldrich Bren sat in a rented office and read through the 17th contract offer he'd received that day. Standard escort work, mid-risk corridor transit. The client was a mining consortium that had previously refused to hire human companies on principle. The hazard pay was double the guild standard rate. Bren had been in merc work for 14 years. He'd met Maddox once, at a licensing summit years back. They'd spoken for maybe 5 minutes. Maddox had been quiet, direct, and uninterested in small talk. Bren remembered thinking the man seemed tired, in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. He read the contract terms again. Double hazard pay, full operational autonomy, no Valith involvement. At the bottom of the offer, In the notes section where clients usually put logistical details or special requests, the mining consortium had added one line. "We understand the terms." Bren set the contract down. He looked at the wall of his office, where a cheap screen scrolled news feeds that were still running the graveyard shift's broadcast on repeat 3 days later. The sensor data, the formation overlays, the detonation flash that had turned a corridor into a memorial. 87 people. He picked up the contract, signed it, and got back to work.
Hey there, space human. I'm really curious about your thoughts on this video. Drop a quick comment and let me know what's on your mind. Or just say hi if you prefer. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Also, remember to check the pinned comment. Trust me, it's worth a look. Oh, and one last thing. I've chosen another video for you to watch. Just click the card here, or here if you want the whole playlist. See you there.